So this morning, I'm thinking about something that I began writing a long time ago when I first came onto the internet, and I was interested in this book called The Metaphysics of Virtual Reality by a guy named Michael Heim. And what was interesting me at the time was the ability for computer mediated communications to provide a kind of intimacy while maintaining distance at the same time. So there were things that you could do, and of course, that was one of the things that brought me to it, which was it's tremendously exciting that you can talk to somebody that's halfway across the country or around the world. And at the time, one of the things that I was doing was doing my race man thing, and I recognized immediately that there are things that people will say to you online that they would never say to your face. Because while there was this intimacy and ability to communicate, there was also a distance. So this new way of communication uh, was, and remains fascinating, above and beyond what I did in my career in terms of decision support systems. But now we've seen that there are some implications to that intimacy that have created dysfunctions that we couldn't anticipate uh, as millions and millions of more people got online and started communicating in this new fascinating way. And one of the things is that you can be canceled, that against your will, the intimacy that you may have provided in a completely different context is scraped from your past and brought into account with no regard to a kind of cyber present habeas corpus. Um, so, despite the fact that I was on the well and there was a very good principle there that says you own your own words, owning your own words uh, makes you something of a vulnerable person. And so, in the context of the recent protests that we've seen this year in the Pacific Northwest, we're all bent out of shape. We're out of sorts because the violence of these protests, while not incredibly horrific, certainly uncivil, have been brought into our living rooms. It's kind of the equivalent of the fire hoses and dogs in the South at the beginning of the civil rights movement. These protests are not just in Missouri or in Wisconsin, they're in our faces. And people we know are talking to us about them. And it's upsetting. Again, because social media and computer mediated communications creates this kind of intimacy. Um, and we're not used to it. We're not used to it being brought home. There's something in me that has always wanted to see. I brought to mind of a photojournalistic exposition that I saw at the Boston Public Library somewhere around 1992. And I remember getting the Time Life library for photojournalism as a young man, teenager, and I was just learning to shoot a Minolta SRT 101. And man, it was very deep and impressive that I was seeing these war photographs, and I said, we used to have this stuff all the time. Why wouldn't it be extraordinary if we had war TV? If there were photojournalists out there who would go into war zones all the time, not just Dan Rather in Vietnam, but hundreds of people from American news organizations. And it would bring the reality of that war to us. There would be this intimacy. We could not ignore it. But that's not what photojournalists are bringing to us. They're bringing to us conflict amongst ourselves. And there's no reason or question why it shouldn't be um, discomforting and making us think twice about our democracy and our society. At any rate, I'm investigating what that dynamic is, because when you become the voice in the wilderness, as it were, the photojournalist that makes intimacy possible from these remote corners of the world, uh, you change. You change because you go out there and discover something that you didn't know. And then you bring it back to the salon where the ladies' bridge club meets on Sundays with their tea cakes. And you're going to shock them, of course. But are you going to change them? And will they be changed as you are? And what becomes of the journalist that's out there? Do they become jaded? Or do they actually learn something? Does it change them? I think it does change you. You change by what you're presented, by what you know. But I don't think it's being done wisely, with discipline, and it's being done in a social context of culture war, which has politicized our very way of lives. Our very individuality is at question because we've decided to sort ourselves into red and blue. So these are observations about what I think is going on and how we can cure it. And the answer is imagination and discovery. And that means you may have to read more than 300 books if you're not going to be shocked. And I understand and respect a person who wants to keep their distance from all this. Guard your soul. You don't want to stare into the abyss. But then act locally. And don't pretend that everything involves you so that you don't have to be a passionate dissenter over an area of society over which you have actually no responsibility. And in that way, we can avoid manufactured manufactured consent. If we can be polled and you say, well, 75% of Americans agree with this, well, they actually didn't. You're just polling, and that's a sample. And then that is a self-selected sample of people who want to be polled. And those are people who are grabbing, they want to pass the news quiz. Well, that's a different kind of person than all of us are. So hopefully, I think I've done some good explanation in this essay, which I think is an important one. And I'm hedging my bet by making this video as well. I hope the sound comes out well enough because I don't want to do this again. I'll talk to you next time.